instituting the highest level.
هستی و غنیسازی و امثال اینا
না হইয়া অনুরাগ বা বিরাগের বশে সরকারের প্রধানমন্ত্রী পদের কর্তব্য করিতেছি যে শপথ করিতেছি যে সরকারের
Coming up on the show, Pakistan launches airstrike deep inside Afghanistan's territory, killing dozens. And Kabul is now vowing what it calls a measured and appropriate response. And as two neighbors edge closer to conflict, the United States is adding to global uncertainty. President Trump defies the Supreme Court and pushes through a new 15% tariff on countries worldwide. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Saahil Menghani and this is the South Era Report. Let's start with our top focus. The fallout is intensifying after Pakistan launched a series of airstrikes across the Afghan border early Sunday morning. India has condemned the strikes as an attempt to externalize internal failures. What we can also tell you is that Afghanistan's defense ministry is now calling these strikes and saying that they hit a religious school and civilian homes in the country's eastern provinces, killing dozens, including women and children. Kabul is now vowing what it calls a measured and appropriate response. The relationship between both countries is increasingly strained, with Kabul summoning Pakistan's ambassador and analysts warning that months of fragile ceasefire negotiations brokered by Qatar, Turkey and Saudi Arabia may now be in ruins. For more on this, let's go to journalist Kathy Gannon joining us live from Islamabad. She's extensively covered Pakistan and Afghanistan. She joins us, as I said, from Afghanistan. Hello, Kathy. What I really want to ask you first is that since you've covered this region for decades, Islamabad is now saying it had conclusive evidence that these attacks were ordered by Afghanistan-based leadership. From what you know, how credible is that claim?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can.
But I think, are you able to hear me?
Very clearly. Please go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. So yeah, I mean, I think the claim that the attacks, the TTP and those who carried out the attacks have basis in Afghanistan is credible. That the Taliban leadership was involved in whether the preparation or whether the actual execution of the attacks is not known. So whether it's credible or not, it's really not known whether there was any involvement by the leadership of the Taliban. So and in the past, it's really been that they have territory. The TTP and those who are anti-Pakistan have space in Afghanistan, and from there they're able to plot and strategize and then carry out attacks in Afghanistan. To which the Taliban leadership has the capacity or the knowledge or the understanding to be able to deal with it, or whether it wants to, is still not really clear.
And given that Afghanistan is under Taliban rule, and also to what you said, given that Afghanistan is under Taliban rule, what I also want to understand from you, since you have covered this region for decades, what does retaliation actually look like in practice? What do you think that retaliation is going to look like?
It's a very good question. Because the capacity of the Taliban to retaliate is fairly limited in terms of, no doubt there will be, I would think, that there will be cross-border attacks. The Taliban have their soldiers on their side of the border, and there certainly have been cross-border attacks in the past. So that would seem to be one possible retaliation. To think that they would use their aircraft that they do have is probably unlikely. However, there is the improved relation between the Taliban and India, which is a long-time rival of Pakistan. And long-term danger of these repeated clashes between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the repeated attacks in Pakistan by militants who have space in Afghanistan and who also have space in Pakistan, is that it creates increased tensions in the region. And Pakistan also blames India for financing and supporting these anti-Pakistan militants. So once it escalates to involve India as well, it's very difficult to see where it could go. And the dangers of it escalating into a larger conflict is there. And that really, I think, is the biggest danger of this continued escalation of tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan,
Which
is the
is
renewed relationship with India,
which
and
is why.
that part of the equation.
You're right. Which is why I now want to ask you about how several countries, have tried to mediate between Afghanistan and Pakistan. With those efforts now apparently in ruins, who do you think has the leverage to pull them back? And how do you see now all those countries are going to react to what has happened in the region?
Yeah. Also another good question. I don't know that there is significant leverage by any one country. Certainly is very concerned with what is going on. The United States has a relationship with Pakistan and with India, but not with Afghanistan. So the depth of the animosity between the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan is quite deep, and so it's very difficult to move the conversation forward and to come up with long-term solutions. There has been some, okay, we're going to stop attacking now, and there's a period of peace, and then the attacks start again. And so I don't see that there's any one country in the region or beyond the region that has the ability to negotiate or push all sides to a lasting peace. The divisions are quite deep. The Pakistan and Afghanistan dispute the border. There are, the UN says, upwards of 10,000 TTP members in Afghanistan. It is a huge problem for Pakistan, and the increasing militant groups in the area is a big problem for the entire area, because it's not just the TTP. There are other anti-Pakistan groups. There are groups that are in Afghanistan, the Islamic State in Khorasan province, that are against the Taliban. There's ISKP in Pakistan. There's a breakaway or a secondary Islamic State also in Pakistan called the Islamic State Pakistan province. So the real problem is the presence and continued presence of militant groups in the area, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and the use by all countries, by Pakistan, by India, and by Afghanistan, to use these militants for their own purposes. And that really is the crux of the real problem in this region to establishing any kind of lasting peace.
Absolutely, you're right. You're right there. And finally, that's why I want to know, is this strike, in your experience, in your understanding, is this part of a pattern that we have seen before, or do you think this is unprecedented?
No, several months ago, Pakistan also carried out airstrikes inside Afghanistan, deep inside Afghanistan. In fact, it reached as far as Kabul. So no, it's not the first. And but the difference today versus even last year or earlier last year is the increased relationship and a growing relationship between Afghanistan's Taliban rulers and India. That's the difference. That wasn't there, say, a year ago. That has just happened over recent months. And in October of last year, the India established its embassy again in Kabul. It did not give diplomatic recognition to the Taliban government. Russia is the only country to have done that. But the difference today is not in terms of Pakistan carrying out airstrikes or the attacks, although they are escalating, which is a huge problem. And Pakistan has borne the brunt, it has to be said, because since 2021 and the return of the Taliban, Pakistan has taken heavy hits to its military. Over 1,000 military have been killed and security personnel and many civilians. In just the last 2 weeks, there was an attack on an Imam Barga, a Shia mosque, killed 31 people. There was an attack on a military outpost, killed 11. And another attack at a police post, killed 2. So the escalating attacks and the increasing friendship now between the Taliban and India is a new addition to the equation, and
Yes.
it's not clear where that is going to take the region, and it's a difficult one.
Very, very difficult. Thank you so much, Kathy, for helping us make sense of that story. She was joining us live from Islamabad, putting that conversation up on our social media as well. From Afghanistan, let's take you to neighboring Iran, which is under renewed strain with student protests escalating and diplomacy with the United States heading into a decisive week. Today marks a second day of demonstrations at some universities, including protests in Tehran and Mashhad. At the same time, Oman has confirmed fresh indirect nuclear talks in Geneva on Thursday. Our correspondent Shabnam Nasibi has the latest and explains what is driving the protests and what is actually on the table in Geneva. Take a look.
Iran is bracing for 2 battles at once, one on the streets and one at the negotiating table. Today, students are protesting again across Iran for a second day in a row in some places. And as that pressure builds at home, Iran and the United States are heading back to Geneva with Omani mediators for nuclear talks on Thursday. The protests are centered on universities, the traditional political tinderbox in Iran. There are reports of clashes with security forces at multiple campuses in Tehran and Mashhad. The state media is portraying some protesters as infiltrators, as slogans have now moved well beyond economics into outright anti-regime politics. The next round of talks is on Thursday in Geneva, and this is the 3rd round of these renewed negotiations. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi says that a deal could be reachable, but Iran insists that it has a right to enrichment and wants sanctions relief. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has publicly talked up the military option. He has set a 10 to 15-day deadline and has warned of bad things if there is no deal. And here's the prep for war part. Iran is trying to rebuild air defenses. Satellite images show Iran hardening the Parchin military complex, including what is described as a new concrete shield over a facility then covered with soil. At the same time, the Financial Times has reported a secret €500 million deal with Russia, 500 Verba launch units and 2,500 missiles delivered over several years. It won't make Iran invulnerable, but it can complicate low-altitude strikes and signals. Tehran is planning for the worst-case scenario. So Iran is now moving on 3 tracks: protests at home, talks abroad, and the hardening for conflict. The question is, do the talks cool this down, or are they just happening under the shadow of a war plan?
That was South Era Network reporter Shabnam Nasimi explaining why these war prep signals matter now. We'll be closely monitoring these developments, so do subscribe and follow South Era Network to always remain updated with verified facts on all of these quickly developing stories. Let's now take you to Mexico, where authorities have killed one of the world's most wanted drug lords. And the fallout is already raising global security questions. The death of Jalisco cartel leader El Mencho has triggered widespread violence across Mexico, with roadblocks and also arson attacks reported in more than a dozen states. The developments could also have ripple effects as far as South Asia, where authorities, have faced growing scrutiny over trafficking routes linked to global drug networks. My colleague Leticia Castro has the full story. Take a look.
Flames on the highway, smoke rising over a major city, panic inside an international airport. This was a scene in Guadalajara after Mexican forces killed one of the world's most powerful and elusive drug lords, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, the alleged leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a global conglomerate with operations spanning the Americas, Europe, and parts of Asia. His death marks one of the most significant blows to organized crime in Mexico in recent years. The operation followed months of intense coordination and sustained pressure from the United States. Washington had placed a multi-million-dollar bounty on El Mencho, accusing him of systematically expanding a global drug trafficking network, responsible for funneling fentanyl and other narcotics into the U.S. amid a deadly overdose crisis. U.S. officials have long urged Mexico to target high-value cartel leaders. This killing appears to be a direct response to that pressure, but the aftermath was immediate and chaotic. Cartel members set up roadblocks, torched vehicles, and spread fear across parts of the city. Even flights were disrupted as security forces rushed to contain the situation around Guadalajara's international airport. Mexican-American journalist Benjamin Zamora was on his way to the airport when the violence escalated.
We saw a group of armed men, and I could notice they were not police, they were not soldiers. They were wearing all black clothes, and they had masks on and heavily armed. And that's when I realized that this was just not a simple situation, that this was a major operation of organized crime. They were targeting cars. They were basically trying to get any car they could get and burn it.
Benjamin and his wife were able to reach the airport, but once there, the chaos erupted.
People were very scared of what could happen at the airport, because the airport has a history of being a place of involvement with the drug cartels and the criminal organizations. That's the place where Cardinal Posadas Ocampo was killed many decades ago when the drug war started in Guadalajara, back when El Chapo was one of the major drug lords. And people were obviously panicking. They thought that armed men had breached the terminal.
And though they made it safely home, many flights were canceled or delayed. Now authorities say the situation is under control, but the incident has raised serious questions. Guadalajara is set to be one of the Mexican host cities for the upcoming FIFA World Cup. With millions of fans expected to travel through the region, security will now be under even greater scrutiny. Officials will need to demonstrate that major international events can proceed safely despite the threat of retaliatory cartel violence. Beyond Mexico, the impact could be global. Cartels like the Jalisco New Generation operate transnationally, sourcing chemical precursors from Asia, moving drugs through multiple continents, and laundering profits across international financial systems. In South Asia, experts warn that could mean heightened scrutiny on chemical manufacturing hubs, ports, and shipping corridors that are sometimes linked directly or indirectly to the global synthetic drug trade. Governments in the region may face increased pressure from Washington to tighten export controls on dual-use chemicals, strengthen customs enforcement, and crack down on money laundering networks that move profits across borders. Security analysts also warn that when a major cartel leader is removed, supply chains don't disappear, they adapt. That could shift trafficking routes toward new transit points across Asia, creating fresh challenges for law enforcement agencies already balancing counterterrorism, cybercrime, and regional instability. For the United States, this is a strategic win in its fight against fentanyl trafficking. For Mexico, it could spark a power struggle within the cartel and possible waves of retaliation. And for the world watching ahead of a global sporting event, the question is whether this death marks a turning point or the beginning of a new, unstable chapter.
Unbelievable visuals. Leticia, of course, is going to follow those developments very closely for South Era Network, so watch this space for latest updates. All right, let's now tell you how the U.S. Supreme Court has dealt a major blow to President Trump's trade agenda, ruling that his sweeping global tariffs were unlawful. But Trump has hit back fast, invoking a different trade law to impose a new 15% tariff on imports from nearly every country in the world. The move has shaken international markets. For South Asia, the stakes are particularly high. India had, remember, already struck a framework trade deal with Washington, while Pakistan and Bangladesh face fresh uncertainty over their key exports to the United States. Let's now break down to help you understand what this really means for South Asia. On your right, you will now see how the tariffs were earlier. On your left, soon you would see the relief each of these countries is getting now, while our team tries to get that in order. So starting with Pakistan, tariffs, remember, earlier stood at 29%. They now get a massive 14% relief, bringing it down from 29 to now 15%. India's relief is smaller in comparison. They dropped by 3% from 18% to 15% now. Remember, that 18% that you see on your screens came after an interim trade deal between US President Trump and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which had already reduced India's tariffs from 50% to 18% you see there. And now they are further down to 15%, down by 3 points. Bangladesh gets a 4% relief from 19% earlier to 15% now. 4% may sound modest, but in trade terms, that translates into billions of dollars. Afghanistan, as you can see, remains unchanged. It was already at 15% and stays at 15%. And Sri Lanka also sees a significant cut, with tariffs coming down from 20% to 5 points down to 15% now. So to discuss all of that, what it means for South Asia and the whole world, I'm now being joined by Vicky Price, a former government advisor to the UK. Hello to you. What I want to first quickly understand is, after the Supreme Court ruling, are these new tariffs legally secure, or could they be challenged again?
I think for the moment they are legally secure because President Trump is allowed to impose tariffs under Section 122, as it's known, which is allowed to have those tariffs if the balance of payment situation in the US is threatened. So he can reasonably argue that he can have that 15% temporarily. Remember, it was 10%, of course, when he first announced those tariffs, when the previous tariffs he had imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which was deemed to be illegal, was thrown out by the Supreme Court. So he said 10%, that now then it became 15%. He's allowed to have those tariffs for 150 days. There could still be some challenges to that, whether indeed the balance of payment situation is such that it does necessarily require those tariffs. But after the 150 days, he can think of something else. There are some other sections that he could invoke. Or Congress will have to decide what happens next. So we are in a situation where we don't actually know exactly how this 15% will work, whether it is additional to other things that were there originally before the exceptional tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs were first announced back in April. And also, there are still sectoral tariffs that are in operation. Whether you look at steel, they vary from country to country. Whether you look at pharmaceuticals, for example, and quite a lot of other tariffs that have to do with areas of the economy which are perceived to be, in the US, which are perceived to be critical for security purposes.
And since you spoke about the US, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you now. What about the local markets? How will these tariffs affect US consumers, prices and jobs, both in the short term as well as in the long term?
The question will be whether some of the very high tariffs that were imposed originally which have now come back, will be able to be reimbursed to people, to companies that had to pay this, and of course to the consumers who had to pay the higher prices. There has been a calculation that suggests that over 2025 alone, average households in the US paid $1,000 more for their goods and services that they were buying by comparison to what would have been the case without those extra tariffs that were imposed by President Trump. And that if nothing had changed, that cost would have gone up to $1,300 extra dollars a year. Now, can they get that back? Can companies that have incurred, in many cases, big losses because they have absorbed those extra import tariff costs themselves and haven't necessarily passed them, can they claim some of that money back? Will there be long legal disputes? There have been cases in the past where that did happen. A few decades ago, when there was some extra tax imposed on oil imports into the US, and then they were deemed not to be legal, they were, after a long time, years, reimbursed. So it remains to be seen. But I think for the short term, it may not make a huge amount of difference. I mean, obviously, if in some cases those tariffs have gone down, looking ahead, they may benefit from slightly lower tariffs than would otherwise be the case. But it's rare that you'd see that actually they're going to start seeing prices coming down.
It is rare. You're right. It is rare. And that's why I wanted to now ask you about the major global trading partners. How are they likely to respond? And could this lead to a wider trade conflict?
It could do. I mean, the interesting thing is that in a number of cases, you mentioned India earlier, what they're going to be doing now is having meetings to not necessarily renegotiate, but before they get to the agreement that they were supposed to be sort of signing off on over the next few weeks, they're going to have to think again and see, because of course tariffs coming down, but also what does it actually mean for individual sectors, and can they guarantee whatever tariff it is and they agree now? Because of course, if after 150 days all that is thrown out and they have to start again, and maybe President Trump finds a different way in which he can reimpose higher tariffs, then that deal in itself is going to fall through. Similarly, actually, not just in the global south, but also with the EU and with the European Union overall in terms of its negotiations, but the UK as well outside the EU, which also had struck a deal, which it now finds that perhaps it's no longer valid, maybe, and they'll have to deal with higher tariffs than they had negotiated before, instead of 10%, 15% on average. But the EU itself, which was about to come out itself with some response to the tariffs that were being imposed on it, is going to pause, a break on its own negotiations. So very unclear. So what will it all mean? Everyone is thinking already about redirecting and looking at their global supply chains. But if you look at the US, since we did talk about it too, it's interesting that it is hugely dependent, yes, of course, on quite a lot of other countries. And, China is an important one. But the EU is a very important import partner for the US. And if it can't get a proper deal with the EU, then it'll be interesting to see what they do to reorient their own trade. And already they have done that up to a point. But it is causing quite a lot of distraction, if you like, in terms of where the various global trade flows are now directed towards. I think everyone is rethinking, are we safe in what we had in the past? Do we need to really rethink our partnerships from here on? And it's been happening. And given the uncertainty, which is increasing, if anything, from the US, it may happen even more aggressively now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vicky Price, former government advisor to the UK, for helping our viewers of South Era Network understand and get a 360-degree picture of what these changes really mean. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Now, staying with South Asia, Bangladesh has a new government and the world's major powers are watching closely. With Tariq Rahman now in charge, the United States sees an opening to push back on China's growing influence in Dhaka. But will Bangladesh actually pivot away from Beijing? Our North America correspondent Michael Shiguri looks at what is at stake for one of South Asia's most strategically important nations.
With the recent victory of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, Washington sees a potential opening to recalibrate its position in South Asia, and that could complicate Beijing's plans in Dhaka. Under former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, China expanded its footprint in Bangladesh through infrastructure projects, defense cooperation, and growing trade ties. Recently, Beijing signed agreements to deepen military collaboration, including plans tied to drone production and broader defense engagement. Now the equation may shift. The United States has publicly signaled concern about China's expanding role and has offered alternative defense systems to reduce Bangladesh's reliance on Chinese hardware. Washington is also pushing commercial diplomacy, encouraging U.S. investment in a country of 175 million people where American corporate presence remains limited. The BNP-led government faces pressure on multiple fronts: balance China's economic role, rebuild strained ties with India, attract Western investment, and manage the 1.2 million Rohingya refugees Bangladesh continues to host. But here's the key question: will the BNP actually pivot away from China? So far, there's no formal declaration of alignment. Bangladesh has historically practiced strategic balancing. However, even subtle diversification, new defense contracts, regulatory reforms for Western investors, closer security coordination with the US would reduce China's leverage. Right now, all we can do is wait and see.
That was Michael Shiguri reporting from the US. Let's now take you to Pakistan now, where a storm is brewing on social media. The Rawalpindi franchise in the Pakistan Super League has officially been named Pindies ahead of the 11th edition of the championship, with the rebrand revealed in a 25-second promotional video showcasing iconic landmarks of Rawalpindi and a message about being bold, challenging, and bringing new energy to the game. But the internet has lost it. Stupid, they said. A disaster, they typed. But while the elites were busy defaming a name, Pindies was achieving what they wanted to, 100% awareness in record time. Let's now show you some tweets which have Pakistan's social media divided. This one, of course, is not in favor of the name. It says, Sheru isn't coming slow. He totally destroyed Houston Kingsman first, and now Pindies. Sorry, Pindies. We can go to the next one. By the way, you can see the vegetable there. A petition to change the name of Rawalpindi. So this has become such a big issue in Pakistan that there are actually change.org petitions being launched. Petition to change Rawalpindi Pindi's name in PSL. We can now show our viewers the next one. But this is really exciting. It has got the entire Pakistani social media hooked. Say sorry, it's not too late. Again, they want the name to be changed. They're not liking it. Mostly the old guard, but that's what it is. We can show the next one, and you can see the funny memes out there as well. But again, it's not just people who are opposed to it. The new guard, we are being told, is in staunch favor of the name. As this one writes, Faisal Kareem, in a world of city plus sponsor plus extra branding, there's only one that stands alone. Just one word, one identity, one vibe, Pindi. So people are also liking this. Let's go to the next one and show some more tweets. Someone please put a petition before the owners to change Pindi. So this one clearly doesn't like Dr. Ahmad Raza saying, please change the name. Let's show you some more as we walk you through what's really happening on Pakistani social media. Rawalpindi owners want to name it Pindi Boys, but later on there are a lot of requests from Pindi girls to put girls' identity also. So that's why they named the team Pindies, which represents boys and girls boards. But again, you have these funny takes. Let's show the next one where, as you know, the meme explains what's happening. So people are not really happy. But again, we are now going to slowly also show you some tweets which are in favor. If we can show the next one. From first ball to final over, it's boss mode only. Royal Pindi doesn't chase hype, it creates it. So people are also liking it. As I said, it's sort of becoming old guard versus a new guard. If we have another one, we'll show it. Otherwise, we'll go to the guest. Rawalpindi streets, markets and parks tell stories of togetherness, writes Tawheed Khan, all under the proud banner of Pindi. So as I said, people are loving it as well. It's really divided. To discuss this further, we are now being joined by Haris Mir from Islamabad. He is, of course, the general manager of the Pindis. Hello to you, Mr. Mir. This must be tough, right? Or are you enjoying it? Because there are a whole lot of tweets which are also in your favor. And either way, curiosity is being generated about the Pindis.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It is lovely to talk to you. Yeah, definitely, we are getting a lot of attention, and I think this is exactly what it was supposed to do. And it's a part of the marketing strategy that we had. Firstly, I think the naming convention of the T20 leagues in the world. I think we didn't want to take a predictable route of city franchising. Cities are usually in franchise cricket. Cities are usually branded as in animals, colors, so on and so forth. So we took an unconventional approach, and I think we are loving all the attention that we are getting.
Oh, of course. Who wouldn't? But make it clear, official on South Era Network of once and all. Are you contemplating changing the name, or is it going to remain the Pindis?
Definitely not. We are not changing the name. I think this the very core of this brand was to create a name that can turn heads, that can break the clutter, that has global appeal, and a local name. And I think this is a brand name within a city. This is exactly what it was supposed to do. And I think it is a name for the future. It is a name for the newer generation, and it is here to stay.
It's here to stay. So that's the confirmation coming in from the Pindis. The name is here to stay. Just a quick trivia, Mr. Mir. India, New Delhi, where I come from, there is a big shop, a restaurant called Pindiwala, which sells trotters. And it's very famous in Delhi. So that's what unites India, Pakistan, and whole of South Asia. Food, the passion for cricket. And of course, at South Era Network, we cover it all. Thank you so much. We're putting that up on our social media as well. Let's now quickly get you speed news. In less than 2 minutes, we'll get you news from all across the globe. First, let's tell you what's happening in Israel. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu has called Modi a personal friend. Of course, Mr. Modi is about to visit Israel. Mr. Netanyahu was speaking at the weekly cabinet meeting on Sunday, commending the personal relationship with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Ahead of his visit to Israel this week, Netanyahu said he aimed to tighten the relationship with a series of decisions set to increase political, financial, and security cooperation between the two countries. So let's now get you the next news. 38-year-old Rob Jetten has been sworn in as the Netherlands' new Prime Minister, making history as the youngest person ever to hold this office. His centrist D66 party narrowly won October's snap election, defeating far-right leaders Geert Wilders. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been re-elected to lead the ruling Workers' Party, with the officials crediting him for expanding the country's nuclear arsenal and boosting its influence in the region. The move reinforces Kim's tight grip on power amid ongoing tensions with the US, South Korea, and Japan over North Korea's weapons programs and regional security ambitions. New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani declares citywide shutdown as severe snowstorm hits the city that never sleeps. Schools are closed, flights cancelled, and all non-emergency traffic lights halted across the northeast as states impose travel restrictions due to dangerous conditions. Today marks, of course, the World Peace Day, and this year it falls at a moment that could not feel more urgent. South Asia is home to nearly 2 billion people, 2 nuclear powers, and some of the world's most unresolved tensions, from the precarious ceasefire between India and Pakistan to political uncertainty in Bangladesh, and now Nepal heading to the polls. The region is at many crossroads. So on a day that traces its roots to a small meeting in Chicago 120 years ago, we asked whether people, not politicians, might still hold the key to peace. South Era Network's Stephanie Haddad with this report.
In 1905, Paul Harris, a Chicago lawyer, gathered 3 friends in a small office with a simple idea. The ordinary people, not politicians, could build connections across divides. That meeting became Rotary International. Today, it has 1.4 million members in more than 200 countries. The United Nations now marks the date of that first gathering as World Peace and Understanding Day. It's usually a quiet anniversary, but this year it carries different weight. in a region of nearly 2 billion people, 3 nuclear powers, and some of the world's most unresolved tensions. We are talking about South Asia. Just 9 months ago, India and Pakistan fought the most intense aerial confrontation in a generation. Dozens were killed. Nuclear-armed neighbors traded missiles and drones across a border that has never truly settled. A ceasefire supposedly holds, but the tension hasn't eased. To the east, Bangladesh is still finding its footing. Last year's uprising that ousted Sheikh Hasina ended 15 years of authoritarian rule, but also unleashed uncertainty about what comes next under a new government. Will the country's relationships with its neighbors, particularly India, be rebuilt on steadier ground? In Sri Lanka, a country that spent 26 years tearing itself apart in civil war, the wounds between Sinhalese and Tamil communities are still being negotiated, slowly, imperfectly, a generation after the guns fell silent. Last September, Nepal's Gen Z generation took to the streets, toppled the government, and even voted online to choose their own interim leader. In a few weeks, the country heads to the polls, its most consequential election in a generation. And Afghanistan, which was once the stated focus of the world's attention, has largely disappeared from the headlines, its people navigating life under Taliban rule, while the international community looks away. And yet, across all of these countries, in Lahore and Karachi, in Delhi and Mumbai, in Dhaka and Colombo, in Kathmandu, Rotary clubs are still meeting, still running literacy programs, still funding health clinics, still quietly maintaining the connections that governments strain and sometimes sever. That may sound small against the backdrop of jets and missiles, disputed borders, and political upheaval, but it's worth pausing on this day to ask if peace ever does come to South Asia. It is unlikely to arrive by treaty alone. It will need the kind of slow, unglamorous, people-to-people work that a lawyer in Chicago started on February morning 120 years ago. The world has changed enormously since then. The tensions are real, the stakes are higher than ever, but so, perhaps, is the need.
The world needs more peace and less conflicts. Let's hope 2026 is the year of peace. The Berlin Film Festival wrapped up this week, but the biggest story wasn't on screen. A boycott, an open letter, and a debate about whether art and politics can ever truly be separated. Muna Khan has more.
This year's buzz around the Berlin Film Festival was not about any specific film. Instead, most attention was drawn to a controversy around a boycott of the event. At least 100 filmmakers and actors, among them Tilda Swinton, Javier Bardem, Brian Cox, and Mike Leigh, signed an open letter accusing festival organizers of silencing artists who speak out for Palestinians. They called a Berlinale stance on Gaza one of institutional silence and said that silence had a cost. However, Tilda Swinton chose to attend and explained why.
I decided in a personal moment was potentially more useful to all our causes than me not turning up.
Author and activist Arundhati Roy made her feelings known without saying a word in Berlin. She pulled out of the festival entirely, refusing to appear alongside a restored print of her 1989 film. For Roy, showing up would have meant lending her presence to an institution she felt was failing Palestinians. Tunisian director Kathy Gannon went further still, refusing to accept an award at a parallel Berlin event after an Israeli general was honored at the same ceremony. Festival jury president Wim Wenders had set the tone early, saying artists should stay out of politics. The letter's signatories responded directly. You cannot separate one from the other.
But we are the counterweight to politics. We are the opposite of politics. We have to do the work of people and not the work of politicians.
For at least 100 artists this year, the Berlinale wasn't just a stage for cinema. It was a test of conscience, and many critics felt it failed.
To those watching us live, let us know what you think of that story by writing in one of the YouTube comments. Now let's quickly take a look at what's happening in the world of sports. New Zealand face a tough road to the semi-finals of the T20 Cricket World Cup in India with two must-win matches ahead against Sri Lanka and England following Saturday's washout against Pakistan. All-rounder Daryl Mitchell says the team takes pride in being Indian fans' second favourite side. The Bangladesh Cricket Board has barred Manjurul Islam from all cricket roles following misconduct allegations by former captain Jahanara Alam. The decision follows an investigation into incidents during the 2020 Women's World Cup. In ice hockey, the United States has ended a 46-year-long golden drought, defeating Canada 2-1 in overtime to claim Olympic men's ice hockey gold. A historic win in one of the game's fiercest rivalries and a moment US fans have waited decades to see. And finally, the Louvre Museum in Paris is known for housing some of the world's most iconic works of art. This weekend, it briefly displayed an unexpected addition. Activists from a group called Everyone Hates Elon hung a framed photograph of Andrew Mountbatten Winster inside the museum, taken as he left a police station following his arrest. Beneath the image, if you can read, a caption read, "He's sweating now. 2026. Museum staff removed the picture after about 15 minutes. So again, as we said, not every portrait in the world's biggest museum stands the test of time, but this one certainly made an impression. We're putting all of those stories up on our social media platforms. Do give us a follow and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. That's it. It's a wrap on this edition. Thank you so much for watching. See you tomorrow.